Hi, today I'd like to introduce the new 62 series that we're launching. So we've got the TS-262 and the TS-462, 2-bay and a 4-bay version. The spec between them is largely the same. We'll run through the differences in a minute. So we'll jump straight in. So the sort of first feature here is it's got the latest Intel CPU from the Jasper Lake series. So this is the Intel Celeron N4505. So it's a dual core, dual thread, 2 GHz CPU, but it will burst up to 2.9 GHz when it needs to. So if you're doing something demanding, it will go faster. It's got a video output on there, so it's got a HDMI 2.0 port on the back so that you can output straight from the back of the NAS, and it will also support 4K transcoding in the H.264 codec as well. It's also got 2.5 gig LAN, so on the back you've got a single 2.5 gig LAN port there, which allows you to do faster networking, more than double the speed of gigabit networking using your existing cabling, so there's no need to get everything replaced up to Cat6 like you would have to if you were going to, say, 10 gig Ethernet instead. So you are able to use existing Cat5e cabling to go all the way up to the 2.5 gig throughput, so you can get much faster throughputs through that single port on the back there. Another improvement here is we've added M.2 SSDs directly in the NAS, so getting access to them is simply remove all the drives from the drive base, and then you can see inside the two M.2 slots there on the main board inside the NAS. You can use these M.2 slots really for any use case you want. You can just create a volume straight on them. You can use them for SSD caching, or you can use them for data tiering using our Qtier function. There are other options for the M.2 slots as well. You can use the Coral Edge TPU, which is sort of an AI accelerator. It will help things like facial recognition processes in our QuMagie software. So there's a few different options that you can use that for, and the M.2 slots are built right into the NAS for that if you need it. Here's a quick look at the front of both units. Largely the same. One's just thinner than the other. So you've got all your status lights there, power button, one touch copy, 10 gig USB port, and there is also an infrared receiver if you want the optional remote control. That's used if you're linking this unit up to a monitor or a TV with the HDMI output. It lets you interact with that directly using the remote control. We'll go around the back. So here's the rear view. Largely the same. Really, the only difference here is the Kensington lock has really been moved on the 2-bay down to a lower position. But other than that, the port layout is basically the same. So you've got another 10 gig USB as well as some slower USBs. The slower ones are great for peripherals that don't need performance. Perhaps you wanted to plug in a keyboard and mouse to interact with the HDMI input. They don't need to be any faster than USB 2, so they're around the back if you want to use them. So the fan size is different between the two, so you get a larger fan obviously on the 4-bay, and you've got that 2.5 gig port as well. So now we'll move forward here. So we've got the specification of the units. So here's the sort of main split between it. So the 4-bay one is currently offered as a 2 gig and a 4 gig. So currently, I believe the stock is the 2 gig. So the 2 gig is a single 2 gig module, but there is 2 RAM slots allowing you to take it all the way up to 16 gigs of max RAM. I think eventually, just with supply chain issues, it is going to move to 4 gigs on board, which won't be expandable. But right now you can get that one from us as well. But as you go down there, you can also see that there is a PCIe Gen3 slot in the back as well. So we'll move straight onto that. So here's the sort of things you can put in that PCIe Gen3 slot. So it's fast enough for adding more of those 2.5 gig ports, and we do several versions of the cards with 1 port, 2 port. We've got one that does 4 extra ports. There's 5 gig options that you can add in, or you can go all the way up to the 10 gig options, and we do single port and dual port options that you can add in that PCIe slot there at the top of the back of the NAS. So that's really useful for you to, if you want to expand it, add some extra capability to the NAS. You might not need it today, but you can add it later. Here's some performance charts. So first we'll talk about the 2.5 gig throughputs. So we're able to fully max that out. No problem at all getting full throughput on that on the upload and the download. And as you'll see here from the next slide, we've also done these tests with 10 gig, both with a single port and 2 10 gig ports. So you can see, the reason we really have no trouble with the 2.5 gig maxing it out is because we can pretty much get really good performance here with the 10 gig throughputs as well. So we're not able to fully max out the two 10 gigs, but we get close. It is only a dual core Celeron after all. If you want to max out the two 10 gig ports or even more, we do have other NAS that are a bit more powerful that could do that. But this is really respectable numbers for a very low power dual core Celeron unit. So yeah, moving on. So here's the sequential throughput speeds. So the different options there. So you can pause that if you want to see that. All this information is available on our website. We have a product performance section, and you can see all these numbers up there. So here we go down to a comparison between the 62 series and the 64 series. So in effect, it's a dual core Celeron series versus a quad core Celeron. I have had customers already basically picking one over the other, mainly because they either wanted a white or a black NAS. So whichever you want, that's also an option. So capabilities of the units is quite similar. The quad-core Celeron does have two 2.5 gig LAN ports, but other than that, the specs are quite similar between them. Both have the HDMI 2.0, both have a Gen 3 by 2 PCIe slot in the back, and the two M.2 slots are the same spec as well, Gen 3 by 1. So there's just a quick comparison. Again, if you want to see that, you can pause the video there and look at that. So moving on to one of the last pages here. It is shipped with a 2-year warranty as standard, and you can extend it up to 5 years if you want. So we do have some warranty services that will let you take that up to a full 5-year warranty. So now I wanted to sort of move into a live demo of just setting the NAS up. So here's a NAS. I put the drives in. So I've got 4 hard drives and I've got 2 M.2 SSDs in it. I've done nothing else. Everything else is default. So I'm just going to go through the installation. So here you can do checking for a firmware, things like that. So it says I'm already on the latest firmware. So I'm just going to click current version. So we'll go through the full setup wizard just in case it's changed from the last time I did one of these. So the NAS name, so I'm fairly boring, I just call it the actual NAS model name, username, put my name, password, type the one I always like to use. There we go. So I'm not saving the password. I usually leave it default here, synchronized with the time server, so click next. Obtaining IP is fine. You can use a static as well. If you want to type it manually, you can go through there and type that in. Just click next and then click apply. Just warning you that it's going to empty the drives of all data if there's any on them. So I'm fine with that. So I'll click initialize. So we'll speed this next bit up. It's just going to go through the steps, reboot the NAS, and then it'll present us with a login page. That login page is where we have to log in using the credentials that we created during that setup wizard. So I use the username of Craig with my password. So when we get to logging into the NAS, I'll come back and we'll go through setting up the drives in a common setup that we see customers using. So I'll just let this run through and we'll speed this bit up.
A few moments later.
Okay, so that only took a couple of minutes. So what we're going to do now is click the Go to NAS Management screen, and it's going to take us to the NAS main login page. This is the login page that will greet you from now on. So here I'm going to log in with the username of Craig, because that's what I created earlier, and type in the password that I typed in. So here it's going to bring us to the page, and there's just a little bit of a guide here showing you up the top left. We've got the main menu. Click. There's the control panel. Click again, showing you where the App Center is, and then you can get user access account and different power options from the top. Then it's going to automatically open up the storage and snapshots pane. So here it gives you a summary of the storage, the drives you've got inserted, allows you to create some storage so you can actually store things in the NAS. We can see at the bottom it says no volume, and on the right it says no storage pool. So that's all the different options. Oh, did I disconnect the network? Let's have a look. It was complaining about the network credentials. Okay, so now we'll log back in. We're going to go into the storage and snapshots application here. It's popped up a little wizard. So here we've got a thing about system data collection agreements. So the first job is I'm just going to look at the storage, make sure everything's been recognized as it is inserted. So in the M.2 SSD slots here, I've got 2 of those. It's showing me that I've got the WD Red SN700 500 gig drives in there. So I'll use those as an SSD cache a bit later on. And if I come down to the hard disks, I've got 4 20 terabyte WD Red Pro drives in here. So I've got 4 of those. So my first step is to go to the storage/snapshot screen on the left hand side. It says currently no volumes and or pools. So my first thing is I'm going to click a new storage pool. I prefer pools over volumes directly, a bit more flexible. Here's where you would enable Qtier. So if you wanted to do tiered storage with the SSDs and the hard drives, that's where you'd tick that. I'm just going to use a main volume with a storage pool and then add an SSD cache. So I'm not going to tick the Qtier option. So here I see the disks and I'm going to tick 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not selecting the SSDs at the top. I'm leaving them free for an SSD cache later on. So I can see I've got those 4 20 terabyte drives. It's auto selected RAID 5 for me. I'm happy with that, so I'll leave it as RAID 5, but we've got lots of different options that you could pick. So if you wanted to pick a different one, you can. So let's click next on that. I'm not choosing a hot spare disk. So let's click next. It's saying I'm going to get 54.54 terabytes of capacity with this setup. And as you change this around, so let's say I did RAID 10, it gives you your estimated capacity each time you select a different option. So I could have 72 terabytes, but I'm not going to do RAID 0. So let's say RAID 5. Click next. You get some different options for thresholds and pool guaranteed spaces. So I'm going to turn off the alert threshold here. Personally, I prefer the alert thresholds on the volume, so I'm going to turn it off there. And I'll leave the pool guaranteed snapshot space. I don't need 20%, 5% is probably enough for what I need. So I'm going to click next. Just say that I'm happy with everything, which I am. I'm going to click create, and it's just again going to warn me that the data on the disks would be erased by doing this. I'm fine, there's no data there, so it's just going to go off and create that RAID 5. After a couple of minutes, it's going to pop up a little box here telling me, now you've got a pool, do you want a volume? Volume is really where the data lives, so you'll need a volume to start storing data into the NAS. So we'll just wait for the new volume button to appear. Okay, so we can see that the storage pool has been created in the background. So here I'm going to click the new volume that's been prompted. So I'm going to say new volume. And you get a few different options here. So for my first volume, I'll probably go with a thick volume. I'm choosing storage pool 1. We've got different videos on the channel as to whether thin volumes, thick volumes, or static volumes are for you. So you can get more information on that on a different video on the channel. There is also a detailed comparison that you can click that shows you the different options that you can get. So I'm going to choose thick volume. I'm going to click next. So now it's asking how much capacity do I want to give to this first volume. So yeah, I'll go with the 10 terabyte recommendation. That seems to be enough for what I need. You've got some advanced setting options down here. So here's where I've got the alert threshold. So you know, I said earlier I don't really set it on the pool. I'm going to set it on the volume. So that's where I've got that set. But here you've got all the different options. You can click set to max and it'll jump all the way up to the full amount. So 51 there because there's some reserved for snapshots. But I'll just put it back to the 10. So here I'm going to click next. Unless I'm happy with all the options, so I'll just click finish. So now it's going to create the storage. So it's saying you can start to store data. So you can start to access it now as it's creating the volume. You can still use it. You will see in the background here that it says synchronizing. So because I've chosen a redundant RAID mode, it's doing a scan, making sure that's all set up. So it's basically preparing the redundant storage for us. So eventually that will say just ready without the word synchronizing. How long that takes depends on the size of drives you're using. Because I'm using 4 20 terabyte drives, that's going to take a good while. If I'd used a couple of 4 terabyte drives, it would take a heck of a lot less time to get there. So just while that's all initializing and setting up, we can see we've had some pop-ups down here on the right hand side. So they're basically a summary of pop-ups that pops out from the notice board, so we can see them in more detail here. So there's basically a 3-step process to getting your NAS set up. So create a storage space. So as this volume is creating, we're going to start seeing ticks start appearing here. So the first one, I'll get a tick on the create a storage space because I've effectively now created the storage space. It's just not at 100% yet, so we'll get a tick there soon. Letting you know that there's a help center, some different options here so that you can see firmware update settings, app update settings, that you've got updates in the app center, that the RAID group is synchronizing. So it just gives you some good information down the side here in the notice board. If you ever want rid of these, you can just sort of click the X and then it pops out here and you click OK and it disappears from there. You've also got a dashboard that pops out from the top right. So if you click the dashboard button, you see this, and if there's any information here that you want to see permanently on the screen, you can just sort of grab the heading here, so like resource monitor, you can grab it and drag it out, and it'll stay on top there, so that as you're navigating around, you can always refer back to this. And you can also click resource monitor, and it will pull out the full application for you that lets you drill down into what the resources are. So that's a very handy little feature that you've got there with the resource monitor. So yeah, that's effectively the storage getting set up here. Storage pool created, data volume. The next step that I would do is I would go into the cache acceleration, so that once the volume has been created, I can then accelerate anything that's happening within that volume. So if I go to cache acceleration and click add, it gives you an introduction about how it works, and there's different ways to set this up. So here it's only letting me select the M.2 SSDs because the other disks are in use. So here, if I was to tick both disks, so number 1 and number 2, it's selecting by default a read-only cache in RAID 0. So that's fine. We can work with that if we want to. For me personally, I like to do a read and write cache, so I'll change it to that one. Now for a read and write cache, it's important that the RAID mode is redundant. You see how it switched it automatically to RAID 1. You can force it to be RAID 0, but it's going to warn you when you click next that you shouldn't be doing a read and write cache ideally without some redundancy. So I'm going to leave it in RAID 1. So I'm going to click next. Enables SSD over provisioning. Now, whether or not you need to do this or not, you should run the SSD profiling tool down on the bottom left hand side. This will put your SSD through a bit of work, set them at different capacity levels, do a performance test on them, and then you can pick which level of SSD over provisioning you need to do. And then you also get to select the cache mode, whether it's random I/O or all I/O. If you choose random, you get to choose the bypass block size. So basically, if I set it to 16 meg, it means any block that is over 16 meg is not going to touch the cache. That's just going to be handled by the hard drives, but everything 16 meg or less will be handled by the cache. So you can tune this to wherever you need to. For me, I'm just going to select all I/O, and it just grays that box out. Everything, no matter the size, is going to go through the SSD cache to try and accelerate it. So then you can click next. It sees I've got a data volume, so here I've got it ticked. I want that data volume accelerated, so I'll click next, and then I'll click create. Just letting you know that it's going to erase anything on the SSDs. I understand. Click OK. So this is now going to create the SSD cache. So you'll see the sort of statuses up here flick around for a couple of seconds here while it creates it. So it's saying cache type not supported. That'll all change in a minute as it creates it. And we can also see over here in the notice board that because the volume created, we got that tick next to create a storage space. So the next step would be sign in with your QNAP ID if you want to, and then also set a security policy. So these top 3 steps ideally would be the ones you do to get the NAS nice and safe before you do anything like remote access or anything like that. So yeah, that's effectively the NAS completely set up with some storage that we can use, all accelerated by an SSD cache. So this was the TS-462 is the one I'm using, but it would be exactly the same on the TS-262, just some lesser drive base. So we can see here I've only got the 2 gig of RAM in this unit, and with the base setup and install there, just used about 50% of the RAM, so it's just going up and down as it's formatting and getting things ready. But that's effectively all set up, ready to go. This particular one being the 2 gig of RAM, it does have 2 RAM slots, so I can upgrade this all the way to 16 gig. The other variant that you can get is 4 gig that's fixed. But we can see the SSD cache is fully set up, ready to go now, and we can see that it's actually starting to help with the writes. So as this sort of RAID rebuild's happening, apps are updating, things like that in the background, we can see things happening. Just to illustrate how easy it is to update an application, I'll open up the App Center, and we can see that there's 2 apps that need updating. So you can either click each one individually, or you can just click all. You sure you want to? I'm like, yes. And it's going to go off and set them up. Very, very simple. It'll do everything automatically for you. But yeah, that's the TS-462. Again, there's a 2-bay version, and it's the effectively dual-core version of the 64 series that we've got as well. So this one will be white, the other one will be black, but that's the 62 series. We wanted to introduce you with a full setup from out of the box. The only thing I've done is put hard drives in, through to full setup with usable storage that I can now copy data to. So that's the E62. Any questions at all, please let us know in the comments section down below, and we'll get back to you as quick as we can. Thanks a lot. Bye.